Welcome to your Thursday night Dynasty Heat Seekers live stream. I'm your host, Bryce Frazier, and I'm joined by the new Dan the Man DMo. How are we doing, DMo?
Good, man. There's lots of stuff going on. We're on the precipice of free agency opening up, so it'll be pretty exciting to see what happens in the coming days.
That's next Wednesday, I believe.
I think yeah, you're right, March 15th. Yep.
Yeah,
That's when they
and
can officially sign people,
yeah. So
sign the
next
players,
week,
yeah.
next week is probably a big week for just sports fans because I think March Madness, like the official 1 through 16 seed, starts on next Thursday. Which I don't watch any, but I always fill out brackets anyway. But
Same here. Yeah.
so it's usually pretty fun. I'm wondering if we'll start seeing some picks being traded, like some of the. I know the Bears are now getting phone call because it was kind of funny because it seemed like maybe 2 weeks ago we were seeing like the Bears aren't going to get the Kings ransom they expected for the one pick, and then after a couple of days of the combine, everybody's like Bears are getting crazy amount of calls for the number one pick. I think it's a lot of clickbait or whatever. But speaking of the combine, were there any players that really caught your eye? Obviously, everybody and their mother heard that Anthony Richardson is a physical specimen when it comes to the quarterback position. But do you believe in him, or what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, I was totally impressed, right? I mean, this guy's bigger than Cam, run faster. He was like out jumping some of the wide receivers. He was just all across the board amazing. But I think a lot of it also comes down to the fact that when you're playing the quarterback position, we've seen people like Tom Brady, less mobile quarterbacks, kind of stand in the pocket and do what they need without all those physical traits. So I'm more interested to kind of see what happens going forward. I'd like him to just sit behind someone for maybe a year or so and kind of learn the NFL game. He didn't get the opportunity as much in college, so maybe sitting behind someone for a year and then really going off from there. I think that would be what I'd like to see. The one that I kind of was keeping an eye out for and wanted to really see was Jalen Hyatt. He was putting some good speed on that in the games. He ran, I think, a 4.41, which is fine. I think people were knocking him a lot because it wasn't in the 4.3 range. I mean, 0.02 is it's not too far off from the 4.3 range, so I still like him a lot. He may not be the first wide receiver off the board. Some people had thought that he may be because everyone likes the speed and athleticism. I think he'll still go pretty high. So that was one of the other points that I was interested in watching. Anything in the combine really jump out to you? What are your thoughts on Anthony too?
Yeah, Anthony Richardson, I think, might be fool's gold. I think that he is a very he's a great athlete. I don't think anybody can argue that. But I mean, if you look at what he did in college, he really didn't do much. And I get it. Maybe Florida didn't have a ton of talent around him, especially when it came to the skill position players. But I think if a team was to use him, I agree with you, where if he was to be drafted, he's going to be drafted in the first round, and when he does, it would be definitely beneficial for him to sit behind maybe a veteran quarterback for a year, learn the system and things like that. But I think when it comes down to it, if he does sit behind someone for a year, no matter what, they're going to have to change the offense based on his skill set and use him similar to how Lamar was used with the Ravens, where he needs to be at his best. He's got to probably be rushing to around 15 times a game for him to be the biggest factor on the team that he's suited for. I don't have much faith in his accuracy and maybe decision making from the college tape. The guys I was kind of interested in seeing a wide receiver myself was Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think personally he's heads and shoulders better than everybody else in this draft. It's just I don't think he got to display it because of the injury, and I think once the season starts, people are going to realize that we overlooked this guy because he was on the same team as Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and outproduced them. Their last year at Ohio State. So I could see him being a big factor as soon as he makes it on the team. And then obviously Will Levis is probably a guy that I'm higher on than most people. And really the only thing that he got noticed was he threw the football 59 miles per hour, which is insane. So he might come into the league with the strongest arm, which could be interesting. But I think he's pretty good at accuracy and things like that as well. But he also might benefit from maybe sitting a year, but it looks like both of these guys aren't going to get that opportunity. Would you agree? Probably both of them are going to get drafted to teams that are going to utilize them right away.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice for them to sit or whatever and kind of develop, but I think right now with the way the NFL is and the QB
Mm-hmm.
situation, it's just the roulette, and people don't know where people are landing. People are needing QBs very badly. I mean, I hear a lot of things right now. I think Rodgers is going to go to the Jets. It's not set in stone, but it looks pretty like it's close to done. Then that doesn't leave many other teams still need QBs, but there's not enough QBs out there. Like, where's the market's going to be really hot for like Jimmy Garoppolo, things like
Yeah.
going to be. They had kind of a few leftover free agent QBs out there. So I mean, one of these teams are going to just fall in love with the combine tape. They fell in love with the answers during the interviews. Um, they're gonna throw them out there, right? I know.
Yeah.
I think going a little bit back to Anthony Richardson when you were talking about it, it just reminds me. I mean, they've always drawn the comps to Cam Newton. I was in Charlotte during that time, living in North Carolina. It was awesome watching him play and just seeing how physical he was. He was just a beast, right? But the
Mhm.
one thing was he could never throw a soft like touch pass. He was always laser everything, and I was just like, gets old, and it's just at some point his game is kind of not rounded enough, and he took the hits and is just kind of fleshed out within. It took 5-7 years. He had a great ceiling, had that Super Bowl run, but for the long term, it just didn't work out. And he at least put some quarterback skills on tape in college. Anthony Richardson didn't have as much, so yeah. Unfortunately, even just the way that the NFL is right now, I think these guys will get drafted highly, and they will get a starting spot, whether right away or maybe it's a couple games in. I can totally see that happening.
Yeah, and to point out that that's been one of my arguments about like some of these dual threat quarterbacks, like Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, Cam Newton, Lamar, and Anthony Richardson are all guys right off the top of my head where I think that their ability to be at the top of their game is based on how healthy they can be running the ball. Because if you stick those guys in the pocket and they're forced to throw it all game, I don't think they're nearly as effective as quarterbacks, which is what we've seen through them. So their careers are really exciting, but they're short lived. They're like similar to like running backs.
Yeah.
But their ceiling's high. Cam Newton did make it to a Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts just did make it to the Super Bowl. So they're capable of getting the job that needs to be done. That window is just shorter is the main issue. Other news and notes. Really, the only other one is the two running backs getting tagged. Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs look to be staying in their current situation. So, what are your thoughts on those two guys?
I like the Saquon Barkley. I liked when Dable came to the Giants. I like what he's doing there, so I'm really happy for him. There was a lot of questions and a lot of people looking down on Danny Dimes turning into Danny Dollars with his huge contract, but they were able to at least tag Saquon. I like the franchise tag here, and we'll see how it plays out. I think it's a non-exclusive tag, which means that I think another team can make him an offer, but he was already asking for 14 million, and I think again with the large pool of players available in the running back space, he may not find it. Plus they'd have to give up a couple of firsts as well. That makes it really difficult to really move Saquon. So I like I like the fit right now, and I like the chemistry that they have going there. So I'm looking for just continued another strong year out of Saquon next year, at least for the Giants. I think they can tag him again afterwards. I mean, it's kind of hard to predict how far down, but at that point he'll be 27, 28, maybe has a couple, maybe 1 or 2 years left. So we'll see. But I'm looks good for next year. For the Josh Jacobs, again, I think he has the same bell cow role with the Raiders. There was, the team itself was really hesitant in the beginning to decide whether or not to give him bell cow position. They were thinking about splitting role with Zamir Wright. There's murmurs of Abdullah being like the kind of the. I think they wanted Amir Abdullah to be like the James White role for the Raiders. He just didn't pick up the book enough, and he didn't have the skill, I would say, or like the fact that Josh Jacob was so dominant, it just kind of just ran all over. So I think he looks good for next year. I think he'll still, again, it's going to be another contract year for Josh Jacobs. I think he'll run hard and do well. Seemed that didn't bother him working with Josh McDaniels, which is different from like Derek Carr, which eventually got the boot for him. So I don't know. Did you have any thoughts particular about Josh Jacobs and Saquon?
I think they staying with their current team is best for both of them fantasy wise. I would like to see Saquon be utilized a little bit more in the pass game, whether that's more passes, for him, like scripted plays for him in the pass game, or Danny Dimes not, kind of seeing the first two reads and then maybe running rather him do better at dumping it down to Saquon. But his usage was still great this year. And then Josh Jacobs, his usage was surprising. I really thought Zamir White would be more involved. It'd be interesting to see if Zamir White gets more involved this upcoming season. Because Josh Jacobs did just get a bunch of miles put on him. And as we've seen, from the past, a lot of times that leads to injuries the following years. But he's been relatively healthy so far, so I hope he stays that way. As a guy that owns a lot of Zamir White, it's a little disappointing. But His opportunity might come next year, and maybe it gives me a chance to buy him even cheaper in some leagues that I don't quite have him yet. So good landing spot for both of them. I really like Brian Dable as well. I think he is one of the he did get Coach of the Year. Yeah, and
so,
I thought that was well deserved. Him or Doug Peterson. So they got a good thing going over there in the Giants. They just got to get a wide receiver. So, all right. Speaking of wide receivers, let's jump into this week's topic. We're gonna go through our top 10 Dynasty wide receivers. So we'll do the same thing as last week. We'll start with my 5, and then we'll jump into your 5. And please interject as I'm talking about my bottom 5 guys. Don't be afraid to interrupt and get a word in if you'd like it. But at the end, you can also talk about them. So at the very bottom, I've got Devonta Smith, Tyreek Hill at number 9, Amon-Ra St. Brown at number 8, AJ Brown at 7, and Garrett Wilson at 6. Now, before I get into like more of these details, I will say outside of like the top 2 receivers for me, 3 through 7 was like really, really difficult for me to rank. Like the guy at 7, I could easily put at 3 and I wouldn't bat an eye about it. I think those guys are just so evenly, in talent and dynasty ranking wise that I couldn't. It was just hard for me. So I just had to choose. If I was up in a draft and all these guys are on the board, who would I take? And that's just kind of the order I went with. So with Devonta Smith at number 10, I think he'd be high. Obviously, he would be higher on my list if AJ Brown wasn't there, because AJ Brown is clearly the better. He's clearly the number 1 wide receiver. Better wide receiver. I think there's some debate in that because I think Devonta Smith has better route running, whereas AJ Brown's got the size and the speed. Devonta Smith probably has the better hands as well. And it is kind of nice that he draws that number 2 coverage, so he gets a lot more opportunity. He did have a career year with the number 1 wide receiver coming into town. So putting him at number 10 at his age was something I could easily put in there. Number 9. Go ahead.
Quick question about Devonta. Yeah, I kind of like the spot where you have him right now. I'll show where I have him, but I was kind of curious to see, is there room for him to go higher? I know you were talking about 3 to 7 is kind of a tier break or whatnot. Do you see him breaking into the upper tiers, or do you think he's kind of at the ceiling point right now, and this is like, really nice moment for him, or just kind of thinking future?
That's a good question. That's really hard for me because this offense is so strange because Jalen Hurts is a dual threat quarterback. So there's just a lot of mouths to feed right now, and I think they're going to have more after this draft. When I'm certain they're going to address running back position. I mean, Smith, Brown, Goddard. It's almost like some of that herd would have to be thin before I think he could move up. I think with all of those guys there, it would be hard for me to move him up above some of these other guys. Maybe next year I could put him above my number 9 Tyreek Hill just based on age alone. But until it seems like Devonta Smith's volume could increase, which would have to happen by Goddard being moved or AJ, someone getting hurt or moved, that's hard for me to move him from that spot.
Gotcha.
Tyreek Hill at 9. Dude's a freak athlete. I know the age is like that thing that we debate when it comes to dynasty rankings. Tyreek Hill's 29 right now. I think he stays 29 pretty much this entire season. I think he just recently turned 29. So I think with a guy with his talent and his ability to stay healthy pretty much his whole career, he's never had any I don't believe he's had any major injuries. I was trying to look at his career box score, and usually you could see if there was an injury by if you saw like a really big dip in yards or something. But I don't think he's missed a significant amount of time or anything like that. So he stayed relatively healthy. Dude's the fastest guy, the twitchiest wide receiver in the NFL. His volume this year was insane. I don't think many people expected him to go from Patrick Mahomes to Tua Tagovailoa and actually do better than he did the year before. He had a career year in receptions and yards. Obviously, touchdowns went down, which you can expect when you go from the Chiefs to the Dolphins. But still, his usage was extremely surprising to me. And I expect to see that this upcoming year and probably the year after as well. So even though wide receivers I like to look at long-term, that short-term dominance for me that could potentially win me a league will just sneak him right in there in the top 10 in my opinion. Amon-Ra St. Brown. This guy I think has been proven doubters wrong now 2 years in a row. I became a huge fan of him when he started going off at the end of last year. I like the motivation that he has behind it. If you watched Hard Knocks, I can't remember the machine that spits out the balls, but he basically goes to the jug machine and catches this. He does this the amount of reps that he was like the wide receiver or like whatever pick he was. He does the amount of reps before. So if he was like the 72nd pick, he does like 71 reps or something like that. It was kind of cool, like the way his mindset is. He wants to prove everybody wrong, and he did it again this year. Dude's super young. And on a team that slings it a lot. Like Jared Goff might not be the best quarterback in the world, but he is a great guy when it comes to you want a wide receiver to produce, and Amon-Ra has been doing that.
Yeah, there was that cool part. I think it's relevant without the Hard Knocks when he was just naming off all the receivers that were drafted right before him. That was pretty. I mean, to me, that's like this guy's motivated, dude. This guy really wants it, and a big part of Dynasty for me is kind of these intangibles. Trying to be able to, you can measure a lot of stuff off the numbers, and you can look at the combine. You can see their college tape and all that stuff. But sometimes it's who that person is, that character, their background, their work ethic, just who they are. I think really affects me in terms of and influences me in terms of how I rank my dynasty wide receivers too, because it is something for the long term. So that's a pretty good spot that you have him there.
Yeah, someone said, "Dang, can't believe Tyreek at 9." Yeah, I mean it's debatable. I don't know if you mean he's too low or too high, but
too high. Yeah,
I would assume he means too high, but he might not know this. He might have just tuned in, not know his dynasty rankings. Yeah, we can see you commenting, Frederick. But let me know if you think that's too high or too low. If I think that's a guy that's easily debatable. That might be too high for a lot of people. Might be some people might think it's too low. Just depends on your strategy with it. AJ Brown at 7, kind of what I was saying at Devontae Smith. It's a lot of mouths to feed. I think this dude's a top 5 talent, but he's just in a situation where volume's got to be split up between all those talented guys. So I stuck him there at 7, and then Garrett Wilson at 6. I'll be the first to admit I was wrong about Garrett Wilson this offseason. I thought he was going to be potentially a bust because I thought at Ohio State the one thing he struggled at getting was separation. He just was amazing at making the contested catches and making crazy catches. He was getting plenty of separation and doing exactly that. And with the Jets, with him getting Aaron Rodgers this upcoming season, I mean, I might have him here at redraft as well. So I really like Garrett Wilson as a huge talent. I wouldn't be surprised if I had him easily in my top 3 next season. So anything else on those guys?
No, I mean I think a lot of these I'll touch on too because I go into it. But I'm guessing Frederick's talking about Tyreek being too high at 9, and I'm kind of with him there. And it's mostly an age thing. I mean, I think he's a great talent, and he finished like top 3, top 4 wide receivers maybe past couple of years and done really well. Transition to Dolphins was fine. It's just an age thing for me too. He's fast, but when's that speed gonna fall off? It
never really did for Deshaun Jackson.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
but being fast and being twitchy are 2 different things, I will say. And he's twitchy and fast. Deshaun Jackson was just fast.
Yeah.
So that ability to cut and accelerate like he does, that is something I'm going to keep an eye on. But I think he'll be all right. Let's get into your bottom 5.
I'll draft him high, redraft every time. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So for my top 5, the bottom 5 from 10 up, I got Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think we talked a little bit about him. The reason that I have him a little lower than you, I like the age and everything, but the real reason I put him there, honestly, was because I really wanted to talk about Jameson Williams. I think that guy's amazing, and I think that he's going to actually be kind of near the top 10, top 12 range next year, what we're going to see. A lot of it is due to Ben Johnson, the offensive coach, and the Detroit Lions. You've seen them putting up great numbers this year. The team as overall, I think they were 4th in points, 5th on offense, and this was his, I think I want to say his 2nd year as the offensive coach for the Lions. I think he took over a part of last year, but he's been really impressive. I mean, the offensive coach, he's been doing really well. He really turned the offense around. And he was being interviewed for head coach positions as well, really showing that he really has something with him. A part of, I think, of what Amon-Ra St. Brown did was really adapt to what Ben Johnson put on plays, and he was able to fit it pretty well and just, excelled. We saw Amon just blow up last year, over 10 plus targets for the last 6 games. Continued that stretch throughout this year until he had a little bit of injuries, but did really well. I think with Jameson coming in and the kind of reports that we're hearing of Ben Johnson wanting to use Jameson all over the field, I kind of see Jameson Williams being kind of maybe a Tyreek Hill type, really fast, but also really twitchy and also just good all over the field, not just the burner. I think that's going to take a little bit away from Amon-Ra St. Brown. So that's why I have Amon-Ra St. Brown a little lower. Personally, I'm not going to really try to trade for him or draft him, but I can't ignore what he's put on tape so far. I can't deny the fantasy points he's put up there. So that's why I have him in the top 10, and also as an excuse to talk about Jameson Williams, which I'm really high on.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And then Garrett Wilson, I think he hit it square on the dot. Everything you talked about, his abilities, and the thing that I completely agree with is with Aaron Rodgers coming into town, most likely. I think he could be a top 3 receiver. He has that skill, he has that size, he has the ability to really go up there. I put him at 9 right now just because I was a little hesitant. It's been 1 year. But honestly, now that I'm kind of, as I was studying a little bit more about Garrett Wilson, trying to read up a little more, I was like, hey, you know what? Maybe I put him too low. So I think he's definitely going to be rising really quickly too. He was offensive rookie of the year last year. Before that was Jamar Chase. Any of the top wide receivers that are getting rookie of the year, they seem to have pretty good careers.
Justin Jefferson the year prior.
Yeah, Jefferson. I think he came in second, but he was the best ranked of the rookies. It was I want to say it was Justin Herbert. I think that year.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and then before that, I forget who it was, but yeah, I mean, you look at those. I mean, it's not a crazy metric or way to analyze the players, but just looking at who the AP decided was the offensive rookie of the year, they've been doing pretty well. So I can really see him rising. Next, I have Devontae Adams. Little bit of a Raiders homer, so I kind of really like Devontae Adams. I like his personality. I like his work ethic. He's always produced. He's super consistent. Just a really good player overall. It's hard for me to fade. A lot of people. Same thing with Tyreek Hill. He's a little older guy, but so far he hasn't shown me anything that's really slowing down. Probably the same way that you feel about Tyreek Hill. So I think he can do well. There's a little bit of questions about who's going to be the quarterback for the Raiders. I think Adams is going to stay with the Raiders, but we saw him even with the couple games that he played with Stidham that he was still producing really well. So I'm not too worried about who lands as quarterback for the Raiders there. I really like him. Think he's going to continue doing well. And I owe him an apology because I drafted Devontae Adams pretty early in his career when he came out, and I drafted him pretty well in our rookie draft in one of my leagues. And I sat him for a while on my taxi squad, and I kept hearing reports about his hands being terrible, drops for a few years, and I just got out on him really quick, and that's when he decided, hey, I got really sticky hands and can make plays, and I missed him. So that's where I have him. For number 7, I got Jalen Waddle. I like Jalen Waddle. I think my biggest concern with him is the quarterback situation. I mean, he played with Tua in Alabama for 2018, 2019, really did well. And then when he rejoined Tua on the Dolphins, anytime those two were on the field, they had a lot of chemistry. He played really well and did really great. Anytime that Tua was out, though, I think the numbers weren't as good. So I see him as a top 10 wide receiver with Tua on the field, but without Tua, he kind of he's slacking to me. So to me, it's hugely tied to his quarterback situation. He's great talent, but again, I don't know what's going to happen in Miami. Tua's good, but I don't know, Bryce. You get, if Tua, let's say, gets one more concussion, what happens with Tua and what happens with Jalen? I don't know if you had any thoughts about that. I've also heard people talking about Tom Brady and all that.
Yes,
so.
I know, I've heard that, but then he tweeted something about like, "There's no way I'm coming out," because he got his daughter a cat or a kitten or something like that. But also Frederick in the chat. We will answer any questions at the end, but he does also like Devontae Adams, just in case you're curious. But Jalen Waddle. So I understand that he hasn't produced as well without Tua, but that's just also assuming that he's not going to get a quarterback better than Tua throughout the rest of his career, because anytime Tua is not in, it's somebody worse, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's plenty of quarterbacks in this league better than Tua Tagovailoa, and quarterbacks that aren't in the league yet. So I'm not worried, because Jalen Waddle has now 2 years in like last year he did better than his rookie year. So now he's progressed now. I think he did better than people thought his rookie year. I was really, if you ask anybody in RotoHeat, I know you're a little bit newer, but I was the biggest Jalen Waddle advocate when he was coming out of the draft. And obviously I was throwing people's faces all the time. And then last year I was big on him. I said he would outproduce Tyreek Hill. Obviously I was wrong, but it still wasn't like something that was super egregious, because they both had phenomenal years. But I think we're going to slowly see like that Tyreek right here and Jalen Waddle right here. I think we're going to slowly start to see it creep like right here, and then eventually it's going to become Jalen Waddle's going to be the guy. It doesn't matter who's there at quarterback, in my opinion. I think that the youth and the talent that he has with it will come. So I'm not too worried about quarterback situation, because even if it might get temporarily bad, I think eventually Miami will, every organization is going to eventually try and find themselves a decent quarterback to build around. It doesn't seem like teams, except if you're the Browns, have a terrible quarterback for like a decade. So
Yeah.
he'll get a good one at some point in his career.
Yeah, no,
Or a better one, I should say.
I completely agree. I mean, he's still ranked 7 for me, so
Yeah,
no huge knocks to him at all. So yeah,
absolutely.
And then at the number 6 spot, I have T Higgins. I see T Higgins missing from your tops 10 to 6. So either you got him really high or you got him a little lower than me. So I'll be kind of interested to hear your take after I talk a little bit about him. I got him at 6 because I think he's really good. I see him as he reminds me a lot of Alshon Jeffrey in his prime. He was kind of the bigger guy. He's a little taller, a little faster, really good ball skills. Yeah, and can make the contested catch. I think he works a little harder than Alshon Jeffrey. Alshon Jeffrey did really good for the Bears for a few years, and then had a couple slower years in Philly. Kind of dropped off, I think, with age and just not being able to separate. I think T has a little bit of better skills in that respect. Of course, the big issue with him is what's the future look like with Cincinnati. Burrow's going to get a huge contract. They're going to want to keep Chase around as well. It looks like they don't need to sign T to anything right now, but they're creating some cap space. Or it looks like they're going to move on from Mixon. It is a little bit unpredictable in terms of where T will go, or if he'll be able to stay with the team. He's at least going to be there through next year, which is a really good sign for the team, and I think they'll just continue to do well. He's always performed regardless. But he's built kind of like a number 1 wide receiver. So I think even if he were to go somewhere after next year, he could do well for probably that second contract. Given his talent profile, though, there definitely is some risk in that. I think there's some of these players that have contested catch abilities and ball skills without the precise route running and separation. They tend to drop off a little quicker. If they start getting injured or anything like that, it could really derail their careers. T's been having some bumps and bruises a little bit, but so far pretty healthy. I like him tied to Burrow for next year. And if they find a way to keep chasing Burrow, Scott, I think I like him where he is, and I think he'll continue to perform. So I'll stop right there in terms of T Higgins. And I guess we can turn to your 5 to 1. You can let me know where you think T belongs in your top 10.
Yeah, before I flash my 5 to 1 and talk about T Higgins, obviously I got to point out that I also, Devontae Adams is basically your Tyreek Hill of mine, right?
Yeah.
We both kind of put a veteran guy in there that we both can help our teams short term, because obviously these guys aren't going to be around, unlikely to be around an elite for 5 more years. But I like you're right, Tua. I can't say I like the stability at quarterback, because Tua could be out. I don't know how many more concussions he could get until he's almost forced to retire, or has to medically retire. But the both teams are in a weird QB situation. I think the Raiders are one of those teams that might get a quarterback and have to start them right away. Especially maybe some of the guys that we mentioned, like Levis or Richardson, that might fall to them and then might not have to move up. But what a great spot to land in. A ton of veteran players around you, great run game, pretty good offensive line. So that's one of those spots where I wouldn't mind somebody, offensive-minded head coach that's been really good with quarterbacks throughout his career. So even if they do have to get a quarterback in this upcoming draft and they don't address it in free agency like Jimmy Garoppolo, I could see Devontae Adams' usage being very similar to Tyreek Hill's. So I don't mind him at the 8th spot. Even though his age. So obviously you can see 1 through 5, T Higgins is not in there. And my concern, the only reason he barely missed my list, if we had top 12, he'd be in it. The only reason he missed my list is kind of the concerns that you brought up, which was uncertainty in the future position, or at the quarterback position in the future. And you compare him to Alshon Jeffrey, and I think that's a really good comparison as well. And I think the way he plays is also similar to Michael Gallup. Obviously, T Higgins is much more consistent than Michael Gallup, but he's that big-bodied receiver that makes those big catches all the time. I just don't like the inconsistency I feel like that he his play comes with. where he's always going to be the second option, um, even if he's in Cincinnati. So to where like outside of, I mean, pretty much all of my players I can see being the main target within the next year or two. Where if T Higgins is still stuck in Cincinnati, he's always the second option, which I don't think is an ideal situation for him. So that's the only reason I've kind of snubbed T Higgins out of my top 10. Still a great athlete. I would like to see. I wouldn't, I'm a Patriot fan. I'd love if we traded for T Higgins. That'd be great for me. I think his usage would be great. So I'd really like to see if he's like could he be a number one on another team, or would he be like Juju Smith-Schuster and just like fizzle away if he was the main guy? Whereas Juju was really good when he was like the second or third option. So I feel like that's going to be something that T Higgins gets when he wants paid. I don't think the Bengals will afford him, like you kind of hinted at earlier. 1 through 5. Chris Olave at the 5 spot. So last year, I don't know if you watched anything, but I was huge on Chris Olave this offseason. He was my wide receiver number 2 behind Drake London. He surpassed Drake London as my favorite wide receiver in the draft during the season last year. I really like Derek Carr going to the Saints for Chris Olave. I think they're obviously putting a Band-Aid on by like this is so short term. Like I can't imagine Derek Carr just takes that team to the Super Bowl, or even, I mean, that I guess that division is wide open, so they could win it. But it just seems like they're putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. But Derek Carr does throw the ball a lot, and Chris Olave probably is the number one option on that team with Michael Thomas pretty much being hurt majority of his prime. CD Lamb at 4. How could you not have CD Lamb there at this point? I think he was top 5 wide receiver this last season. His volume is insane. Dude's a freak athlete. I'd argue he's the best after the catch out of all the receivers in the game. Even above Chase and Jefferson. Like CD Lamb is electric after the catch. The problem is the catch. He has been known to drop some balls this pretty much so far his whole career. But when he has it in his hands and secure, he's electric. Jalen Waddle at 3. I kind of already told you I was a huge Jalen Waddle fan. The progression 2 years in a row, or now after his rookie season into his second year, I can see it again happen in his third year. I'm really big on Jalen Waddle. I'm going to continue to be that way. But again, as I mentioned earlier, these guys 3 through 7, in my opinion, I could scramble them up, pick their name out of a hat, and I couldn't argue putting either one at 3 and either one at 7. Like you could flip this list and I wouldn't argue it or put any of them anywhere else. And then I think most people would agree. Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase are 1A and 1B. Kind of pick your poison. The only reason I put Jamar Chase at number 1 is because I'm more than confident the Bengals keep him with Joe Burrow, and that combo for years to come is just something I can't overlook. Where Justin Jefferson, I like Kirk Cousins. I think he's a good quarterback. Might not be a Super Bowl caliber quarterback, but he's still a great quarterback, has had a great career, is still going to be able to feed Justin Jefferson this upcoming season. But then I think next season we're going to be talking about quarterback issues with Justin Jefferson moving forward. So those are my top 5 guys. What are your thoughts?
I guess the quick question was, do you think anyone could overtake Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase maybe in the next year or two?
Ooh, that is a good question. Overtake them? No. Do I think somebody could be up in the conversation with them? Man, just based on skill set alone, after what I saw, the only 2 I think I could potentially talk about in that situation would be Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Just because we've seen enough of CD, we've seen enough of Waddle at this point to where I don't think we could put them up there with them. And the rest of these guys, where I feel like Wilson and Olave still have another year to maybe convince us that, well, could these guys be up there potentially in the debate with Jefferson and Chase? I think it's definitely something that's very, very, very unlikely, but those are the only 2 guys, just because we haven't seen enough yet. I really like Jackson Smith and Jigba. I honestly, if we didn't include rookies in these rankings, but I think he's a sleeper on a guy that's going to be on our list next year, and wouldn't surprise me with his skill set if we're talking about him in the top 5 next year either.
Yeah, JSN is kind of interesting that you kind of mentioned it too. I think part of it, and I'll talk about it later with Justin Jefferson, is I look at the talent level of JSN, and I just think it's really good. It will depend a little bit on where he lands, and it kind of affected a little. I mean, I can share it right now. Justin Jefferson's story. We were looking at the draft, and in my rookie draft for my dynasty league, and I was sitting there like at one point at 1-7 or 1-8, and Jefferson was there, and Jalen Reagor was there. So I was looking at both of them. I knew both were talented. I knew Jefferson was definitely talented. I was about to grab him, and just reports and hearing about how he's gonna be playing in the slot. And in my mind, I was thinking, Vikings slot wide receiver with Kirk Cousins just didn't sound that great. I was kind of riding the high of the Eagles, Wentz doing well, coming off Super Bowl performance with Nick Foles, Rager putting some excellent stuff on tape. Granted, I think it was
Ooh.
Big 12 TCU stuff. I said, and I like the speed. I think maybe that's why I'm a Raiders fan, right? Just love speed all the time. Picked up Jalen Rager and just let Jefferson slip and kind of changed my team permanently.
I have
So that was
not.
one of huge regrets. But big thing I learned from there was talent over opportunity. If you tell me that JSN, and I agree with you, I think JSN is the best wide receiver coming out, and definitely could be kind of up here. The lesson to take away from me was talent over opportunity. If even if JSN lands somewhere terrible and just doesn't look like he has a good wide receiver, a great quarterback throwing to him, you never know. Give him a year, maybe even half a season, maybe quarterbacks changes. I think the talent will shine. So, a lesson learned on that one, and not going to do that again. So,
I think the worst I have of that story is I took Zach Wilson over pretty much everybody but Trevor Lawrence, which isn't as bad, but yeah, I luckily I've hit pretty good on rookie drafts so far.
yeah.
But that one would hurt. That probably hurts as bad as the Eagles like actually taking him.
And just one more question about just dynasty strategies in general with these wide receivers, the high end wide receivers. It sounds like you do hit well on them. Do you ever trade for any of these wide receivers? Do you ever sell any of these top 10 wide receivers? What do you try to generally do if you had a feel? I know it probably is dependent on the player, but I don't know what your thoughts are in terms of dynasty strategy. Do you go out aggressively to acquire them, or do you kind of just play the draft process and try to learn it through and just kind of pick them up there?
I was really high on this last draft class at wide receiver position. I really liked
Smart.
George Pickens. I really like Trey Burks. I still like Trey Burks a lot. I think he's being overlooked, but I've traded Jamar Chase in a league where I had no depth, no draft capital. I obviously was on my way to be like last place team, and the trade in hindsight was not good. Like I definitely got burnt on it, but it could end up being good because I got Alvin Kamara. I basically traded Jamar Chase for like the 104 Isaiah Pacheco, Malik Willis, James Cook, Alec Pierce, and then I got somebody else that's worth it. And at first the trade looked really bad. But then it's like that 104. I'm real quarterback needy, so that 104 made it a little better. But yeah, I will trade for depth more than anything. If I have one of these top 10 guys, it's like, man, my team's not going to be good for a couple of years if I don't make some moves to get some depth or draft capital. That's what I'll do. I seldomly, unless I'm super deep, will trade for a top 10 guy because I just feel like the price. People are pricing them up there that high, so I'd rather take some. I'm a gambling man, so I'll take some jabs at these guys at the in the draft and hope I hit. I hit on Christian Watson so far. I hit on George Pickens, Jamar Chase when I drafted him. So yeah, I'll try and get these guys before they get in the top 10, obviously, which is what everyone tries to do. But it's just all based on where your team's at, right?
That's
so
true. Yeah.
I lack depth, so yeah, I'll trade them to try and get a big package and add some depth to it. So.
Yeah, and I think the important thing that you kind of mentioned there is just having that flexibility to be able to part with some of these top talents at times. They're in the top 10 for a reason. They're really high in value.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely can just take that value and ride it out over their career. They're going to do well. Look, Tyreek's a great example. You just ride him out, and you're going to have great finishes and all that. Same time, why not trade it in for some value? See if you can get something
Right.
better. I did something similar. I know we talked a little bit offline earlier, kind of the trades that I pulled off this offseason was AJ Brown. I'll talk about it when I get to it right now. But going to my top five, I have same with you is Chris Olave. I think this guy is probably one of my favorite wide receivers right now. I think he will be able to be in that top tier with the 1 and 2. I don't know if Derek Carr will be the talent to be able to bring him up head and shoulders above those two, but he looks great. I mean, I just think he has it all.
Hmm.
The one thing I was trying to look and see was anywhere you look and you look at any of the metrics for Olave, you can just Twitter search Olave and all those analytics stuff, a dot, yards per route run, target share, air yard share. His name is always popping up there with Justin Jefferson, Jamar, all the big guys, all the big guns. And the fact that he's doing it as a rookie was really eye opening. I really came on to him pretty quick too. I liked what he was doing. He looked really smooth, coming out of OSU. It was the first couple of weeks when he was just leading the league in air yards. I was like, this guy's gonna explode soon. And I traded aggressively. I got rid of. I've traded Jahan Dotson after he had like couple 4 good weeks.
Yeah.
Ramondre Stevenson, and I think I gave up another piece. I was just like, let's go, and I think in the end it worked out for both of us. He needed a little more depth, and Ramondre seems to be pretty good. I think Dotson's gonna have a really good year, but Olave was a big piece in carrying me to the. I ended up in the semifinals in one of the leagues with Olave, and I think he put up good numbers, solid numbers. He wasn't like blowing people away with like 20, 30 points, but still was a really steady piece. And just knowing that he was a rookie doing that, I'm excited to see what he does with Carr next year. Derek Carr, he gets knocked a lot for what he does, but he's pretty accurate and he can
Yeah.
throw a pretty good deep ball. So I like Olave. I think we have them both, right in the right spot and could easily move up, which is impressive for being at number 5. For me at number 4, I have AJ Brown. I like AJ Brown a lot. He fell to me in one of our drafts. My league was kind of in. It was before it became half PPR. It used to be a standard league, so a lot of people were drafting running backs just top heavy. AJ Brown fell to me in the second round, and it was gold. It was awesome just watching him do his thing in Tennessee, and I think he's going to continue doing well in Philadelphia. The concern that I have, like you mentioned, is the fact that he is the 1A and with Devontae Smith, and really Devontae Smith coming on a little bit more next year, doing really well. I think some of that goes towards Devontae Smith. So, he's still number 4, but at the same time, I don't think he's gonna get any better. I think last year was
Right.
his best year. We talked about their schedule. It was really, really not nice and soft. He was really obviously was super motivated coming out of being traded from the Tennessee onto this team. So yeah, I just think it was the perfect storm for him to have a really great year. And so what I did was I traded AJ Brown this offseason for Trevor Lawrence, Jamison Williams, and Jacoby Myers. Another one of those things, like it was really hard to be able to part with AJ Brown. It was comforting to know that I had CD Lamb's my second wide receiver on the team. So being able to trade AJ Brown was a little easier in that sense, but it was still hard to part with someone that's top, putting up
Hmm.
great numbers, and they're gonna have a good career. I just really was super high, and I continue to be really high on Trevor Lawrence, especially with Ridley coming back. That
Yeah.
I just had him super high
Did,
there.
Speaking of, did you see what Ridley said?
Yeah,
He
yeah,
said, like, I'm putting 1,400 up easy. Oh,
yeah,
that was
yeah.
great.
Oh, I love it.
I was like, oh man, I'm not trading him now. I'm in like a league where I was gonna like trade him for like Trey Burks in like a second, and I'm like, you know what? I have a chance to win this league. I'm like, I'm just gonna keep him. I already have like 4 other running backs, wide receivers
Yeah,
from that class. I'm like, oh yeah,
dude.
that
Yeah,
was good to hear.
yeah. No, I mean, so for Ridley's not on the list right now just because of we don't know it,
Age,
age, all
age
this stuff.
too.
But man, he finished that one year when Julio's last year. He finished as a top 5. Ridley finished as a top 5 wide receiver that year, and I think he had
Hmm.
injuries the following year after Julio left. The age kind of knocks him down a bit, and fitting in a new system. I mean, it seemed like Lawrence really clicked with Kirk. I think Ridley will take over the number 1 spot. There
Oh
might be
yeah,
a little bit of splitting, but yeah, if I can get him, I'm getting him right now. So I'm jealous that you have shares of him because Ridley's kind of like the talk of the town in both of my leagues, so it's kind of hard to really acquire him. Unfortunately, I'd have to really pay almost like top 10 prices to get him, and
yeah,
then there's no value for me to gain at that point. So I'm
right.
just gonna kind of sit and wait and see what happens. CD Lamb, I really like him. He's true alpha. I think he's a really good wide receiver. He does have a little bit of the issues with the drops that you mentioned, but I think the reason that I really like him, not only the youth, the production, and all that, but I see a great future too. You might think of how Dallas Cowboys treated Amari Cooper. They signed him to a huge contract and then they let him go for I think a 5th round the year before. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that Amari was a little bit inconsistent. Even when he was on the Raiders and through Dallas, he always had up game, down games. Even this year when he was with the Browns, Amari had just, he did really well at home, but he had really down games when he was away. So
Yeah.
that inconsistency, I believe, kind of affected the Cowboys' decision on what to do with him. And I think CD and to me that reeks of like lacking a little bit of leadership. I really
Oh
like
yeah.
what yeah. So I really like what CD Lamb did over this year when they gave him this full year. He did have a couple of down games that I think is more based off of whether quarterback situation or the
Hmm.
defenses they were facing. But it wasn't as up and down or erratic as Mari Cooper. So that's why I think the Dallas Cowboys are going to continue holding on to him. They'll sign him to a huge contract, and he'll continue to do really well. He's wearing the number 88, so he has a long line of legacy to
Yeah.
maintain the Cowboys wide receiver thing. So I have him right there, number 3. Would he ever ascend to number 2 or 1? Probably not, unless there's massive injuries to Chase or Jefferson, God forbid. But I think he's pretty locked in there at the number 3 spot, and I have him kind of in his own tier right there, right before the
Interesting.
tier of like AJ Brown and all that.
Let me
And
ask you before you
yeah,
get to your last two. Now Dallas is like one of those teams. Like Jerry Jones is really hard to predict on this draft, but I feel like one thing they lacked last year was a true wide receiver too. What would be? I think this would be a nightmare situation for me. Obviously, as a Patriot fan, wanting Jackson Smith and Jigba, and somebody who thinks he could eat wherever he goes, but because I think he could surpass most of the wide receivers on his team, but I think it'd be hard to surpass CD Lamb. What would Jackson Smith and Jigba going to Dallas do to CD Lamb's value for you?
oh man, it would. Yeah, I think he would definitely eat into what CD Lamb's producing. I mean, CD Lamb this was a special year too, and I think he had 149 targets, which is like insane. It's really way
Yeah,
up there. They didn't really have a second receiver. I could see something a little more. He'd probably lose. I mean, with I'm assuming Schultz is gone too. I can see Jackson Smith
probably.
picking up like 40, 50 of his targets on Lamb. I would definitely drag Lamb down a little bit. Um,
It'd be a
I'd still
nightmare for
have
me.
him. Yeah, I'd drag him down a little bit, but not too much, honestly. We've seen these teams where they have the 1A, 1B situations.
Yeah,
We had, so and Dallas was a high producing offense last year, so we'll see if they can do it again. Mike McCarthy is going to be the offensive coach. He's going to be calling the plays next year, so that might affect some of what happens.
yeah. What a shit show.
Yeah, that's kind of scary. I really liked what Kellen Moore was doing, and but unfortunately, we'll see what happens. So it could be a 1A, 1B type of situation. I don't think he could overtake CD Lamb right now. Maybe down the line, CD is still a supreme elite talent that it's really hard to say. So
Fair enough.
what I'd like to see is kind of like a veteran. I think the most recent rumors right now is maybe OBJ
Odell.
going over to the
Yeah, Odell.
Cowboys. Yeah.
Yep.
Seems like a
That'd be
pretty solid
perfect.
fit. Yeah. Yeah.
That'd be a perfect fit. I don't know why. And I've heard that Dallas would, if Bijan's there, they're going to take him, even though they tagged Pollard, which I think would still be a great idea for them to do.
Mhm.
Because I really don't think Pollard's suited for like the volume that maybe Zeke got earlier in his career. So,
You have any
but
issues
we'll see.
with Dak? I guess going forward on the team and all that. I know it varies, but
I'm not
some
gonna
people like him. Yeah.
try not to offend our viewer Frederick, because he is a Cowboys fan in here.
Yeah.
No, but
Well,
I think Dak Prescott is like a great quarterback, just not an elite quarterback.
yeah.
I think he's like similar to like Kirk Cousins. I know people might, but he's kind of similar to what Tony Romo used to do when he was there. Like always put up these great games, lead the team to the playoffs, and then like kind of would fumble in the biggest games of the year. And throughout the year, he'd had some inconsistent games here and there that would put doubts in people's mind. But their career paths are so similar. But Dak puts up numbers and he feeds
Yeah.
mouths. So it's like
Yeah.
if even if CD is there, like and they draft a wide receiver, which I think is definitely possible if they don't get Odell, they could still get a guy in the second round. But that person could get whoever they do draft. I think would have a significant amount of volume. I just don't want them to draft another number one wide receiver, which I think Jackson Smith and Jigba is.
Mhm, mhm.
So
Yeah.
I like Dak Prescott. I think he's great, just not elite.
Yeah. Gotcha. For my 2 and 1, I got it's probably the same 2-1 as a lot of people like
Mhm.
you mentioned. I have Justin Jefferson first, and I have Jamar Chase second. think the only little difference that I have for them was it kind of ties in with T Higgins and kind of who you put across from Jamar. I think Chase just draws so much defense coverage. We saw him getting triple coverage, double coverage a lot. T did draw some of it away, but if you don't have someone as good as T going along with Chase, I think Chase is just going to be a magnet for all the coverage, and I think it's just going to be that much harder. So that's why I have him a little bit lower. And again, he's really good. There's no doubt about that. But that's the only reason I knocked him a little bit. Justin Jefferson, I have number 1 overall. He's done it all from the beginning of his career. Other than that first few weeks when he was a slot receiver, and then they moved him all over the place and he started doing well. I no knocks against him. He won the offensive MVP. He's young. He's producing with Kirk Cousins. I think the team knows that he's the man, so they're just going to continue feeding him, and he'll continue to produce. So I got him number 1. Super young. I don't see anything going wrong with him. A lot of what I did, and just talking really quickly, generally about the dynasty wide receivers, a lot of what factors in that a lot of people maybe not factor in. I don't think about is and I mentioned it before, is just who they are as people and what they're putting on tape and how they are as background and their work ethics. I follow a lot of these guys on Twitter, Instagram, all the social media, wherever I can get any sort of access to them, just to get to know the people as the players as people. I think it matters a lot to me, and that's because when I'm looking at wide receivers in the dynasty format, I'm looking at not only like their rookie contract, which I might do more emphasize with the running backs. With the wide receivers, I'm looking at a longer time frame. I'm looking at 8 years, 9 years, kind of seeing where they're going to develop and what's going to happen. Part of that is huge, and part of being able to have a stable, good career for 8-9 years is kind of seeing who they are as a person. So one of the best conversations that I had was with the former Bobcat for the Charlotte Bobcats basketball team, GM Rich Cho. This was like 10 years ago when I first starting out in Dynasty. He was telling me, I was like, hey, I was like, I want to be a GM. How do I do that? And he was like, well, you got to learn not only everything about the game, you got to learn all the rules, but you got to learn all these players. You got to know who they are, who's their family. You want to know what they're chasing. Do they like girls? Do they like drinking? Do they like going out? Are they working hard? Or are they in the gym? And I was like, bro, I never thought about all this stuff. I'm just like, this guy's putting up yardage. Isn't that good enough? And within the basketball context, is like that's all good and well, but you really got to see who the people are. And I've been able to really factor that a lot into my dynasty analysis. It just kind of comes over time, and I definitely hit and miss a lot. Social media isn't necessarily who they are as a person on the inside or who they are, but it still does kind of reflect their personality, what they like and what they don't. So I find that to be one of the tools that I try to use to try to gain an advantage against the other GMs in my league. So
that's a good point. I mean, we're seeing, luckily wide receivers haven't been too awful. I mean, we obviously had Henry Ruggs who, got just in a, I don't think he was he just got in a terrible accident by making a terrible mistake. I don't think it was something he made a habit of doing all the time. But you've seen like what Joe Mixon right now, or what Alvin Kamara got in trouble for, like where some of these guys might outside of the game might not be completely focused and might be maybe it's not them, but maybe it's the people that they're surrounding themselves with. Causing problems, and now it's going to affect their careers, which then affect how they produce in fantasy if they're not playing. Like Joe Mixon's probably not going to be playing on the Bengals this next season. It makes sense for them to move on. His contract's absurd for a running back, and then which they have no cap space and they need it badly, and they could easily draft a running back to make and do probably just as well as he did. So knowing these players and knowing their motivation is huge. It made me, like, when I watched Hard Knocks, like Amon-Ra St. Brown became like a guy I targeted like in every redraft league last year. Like every redraft league, I was like, oh, I want Amon-Ra. Like, I've been watching Hard Knocks. It's so fun. Like I watched Hard Knocks the first time when, oh man, I can't remember what team it was now, but when the Raiders did it. So like 2 or 3 years ago. And like ever since then, I've loved it. Like Max Crosby was like the guy they kept talking about in the Raiders, and look at his, and you could just tell this guy wanted it. He wanted it. And like, look at what his career's become since he wanted it. And like Cleveland Farrell was like never on there. Like he was never doing extra work and he was never doing anything. And that was the year they drafted him in the first round, and then Crosby in the third. And now look who's like a Pro Bowler first teamer is Max Crosby. So what these guys do off the field and their character is just extremely, extremely important. So I agree with what you just said. And Justin Jefferson, like, man, the Vikings have just been wide receiver rich. Like their fan base has always had a wide receiver to root on, right? I mean, you went from like Randy Moss to, a small break, but then Stephon Diggs who is a phenomenal athlete, into now Justin Jefferson, who could go down as like already on track to go down as one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest, if he keeps the pace he's on. So you could literally, as a Vikings fan, have like the 1 and 2 greatest wide receivers of all time potentially, which is I mean, debatable, obviously, but Randy Moss is my number one. I always tell people that, but I'm a Patriot fan, so I might be a little biased. So we don't have a ton of questions. We have some comments that people. I forgot to put this up, but Craig said I'm here for the Jamison Crowder discussion. He's always goofing around. He'll get in here and like ask us IDP questions, and I have no clue. And I'm in defensive leagues, I'm in an IDP league with him, and I go by like Moneyball. I do the Moneyball strategy where I just like, oh, what did they do last year?
Yep.
hope they did some. And then the Facebook user had just kind of put his trade in here, so we can talk about it real quick. He just got CD and Madison for the 106 and 107 in a 10-team 1 QB. And since I got to read it, I'll let you process it for a second. But I love this trade. I think in a 1 QB league, I think for me personally, there's a significant fall off after number 3. Like, I think it's Bijan, Gibbs. In whatever order, I'd probably go Bijan, Jackson Smith, and Jigba Gibbs. And I think there's a drop off for me personally. So getting a top 5, a guy that we both have in our top 4, for both those picks for me is a smash. And Madison's just like kind of more of a handcuff than anything.
No, I completely agree with you there too. Especially in 1 quarterback, and if it's a 10-team league, you really want to consolidate. You really want to get as many top high-end players as possible.
Oh, yeah, 10-team, yeah.
Yeah, 10-team. Every team's going to be loaded. So getting CeeDee Lamb there is really great. I liked Madison. I like what he did whenever Dalvin Cook was out. I know some teams right now, there's rumored to be talking to Minnesota to see if they can get Dalvin Cook on their team. I don't know what teams are out there trying to go for him, but if they re-sign Madison, or if Madison moves to another team, it's a nice little flyer to have. If you ask me if I want a CeeDee Lamb or the 1.6 and 1.7, I'd still take CeeDee Lamb in that deal. And a lot of it is because as of now, I do have that same tier break in terms of the rookie draft. I have that in a 1 quarterback league, the top 3 and then a distant 4. I don't even know. Yeah, same 3. Bijan, Gibbs, JSN, might have Gibbs and JSN flip flop. But I'd probably have JSN actually second, just because I prefer the wide receivers overall. Still a lot of question marks. I think the draft will help kind of formulate a little more in terms of what the 6-7 looks like. But right now, if you were to offer me that, I'd smash and take that CD and Madison side easily.
And it helps when he's pairing it with Chase and Waddle. So he's got my 1, 3, and 4. And he's got all 3 of those guys are in our top 10. So that's that's a stacked wide receiver core, my friend. Yeah. Great job. And he said great list and arguments for all players. We thank you. Sorry, I don't know your name. For some reason on Facebook, it doesn't say the name. But if you ever hop on YouTube and comment, it'll tell us who you are. I can always check later after the stream. But did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but if you had a guy outside this list, and I'll mention mine too, do you have any particular buy low that either can make it into the top 10 or, doesn't even have to be into the top 10, but one wide receiver that you're really kind of high on right now going forward and would really want? For me, he's not anywhere near the top 10. He's probably not going to be the top 12. I talked a little about Ridley and Jamison kind of being my 2 guys, but outside of those, I really like Jahan Dotson too. I think anytime he was on the field and when he was healthy, he did really well. He didn't have the quarterback help. He didn't have as good quarterback at Penn State, but what he did with the Commanders last year was pretty solid. Whenever he played, separates, gets the ball when he's getting the touch in the red zone. I like Bieniemy being over there as well. I was never a big Terry McLaurin guy, so honestly, I kind of think Dotson might be above McLaurin by the end of next year. But he's someone I'm trying to scoop up everywhere right now too. Price is low, and I think the upside is there, that it's worth trying to chase after. He might not crack the top 10 by the end of the year. Best case scenario, maybe like a top 15, top 14. That's pie in the sky hope for Jahan. I don't know if you had kind of similar thoughts on someone else that you really like to buy and kind of go after. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked because I had to think about it for a second.
Yeah.
I like Jerry Jeudy a lot. I think he's a guy that's also far off this list. A lot of people probably don't have him ranked far off of Jahan Dotson. I think this is just a guy who's been hindered his entire career because of injuries. Still super young. he ended last year very well. When he was on the field, he did a really good job. I'm hoping the coaching change and the traction he had at the end of last year can maybe transition into this upcoming year. There are rumors that he could be traded, and there's rumors that he could be traded to New England, which I wouldn't. Obviously, I like that a lot of these teams are now trying to pair their college the college connection, which they had. So I'd really like to see that. But even if he doesn't move, I think Russell Wilson still, even after this terrible season, could produce a wide receiver one with the talent that Jerry Jeudy has. The main thing is he's just got to be able to stay on the field. I think he has all the tools, though, and he's still young. So he could definitely be a guy we talk about in the top 10. But I think right now, a realistic like ceiling could be like we discuss him in the top as like a top 15 guy.
Cool.
So yeah, I like that question. I'm glad you answered first because I definitely had to think about it. And then I wanted to ask you with like these rookie wide receivers. You already talked about Jalen Hyatt, and obviously we have Jackson Smith and Jigba rated head and shoulders above the rest of them. Like what do you have Jalen Hyatt as that wide receiver 2 in this draft, or is like Quentin Johnston or Jordan Addison like the guy you have like second or third?
I got Jason first, I got Jordan Addison second, and then I got Jalen Hyatt third. Pretty high, but
Okay.
Jordan Addison, I think he did really well when he was at USC. A lot of it with Caleb Williams and all. People might knock his size, but dude, you just point to Devontae Smith, right? You kind of point to a little smaller frame, but they still perform. Also, the fact that NFL is changing, I think they're protecting wide receivers a little more and things like that. I think Jordan Addison will be fine. I think he'll do really well out there. Quentin Johnson, I'm out on. He might be the specimen that everyone likes to compare. The big body wide receiver can do everything. Just seeing what he puts on tape hasn't impressed me too much. Someone of that size, and people talk about it a lot too, is just catching with your hands or catching with your body. And it really is. He's not catching with his hands as much. He's got a huge frame, but he plays smaller than his size. I think it's kind of, honestly gives you Kevin White vibes a little bit. So it's kind of
I seriously was about to say the exact same thing.
It's just hard, and
same guy.
Yeah, it's too much of a bust for me. I like the route running more than anything coming out of college. I think that's one of the best skills to have. That's why I think JSN's number one. I have Addison really high. I think Jalen Hyatt's a little underrated on that aspect, so that's kind of my 3. And I'm out on Quentin Johnston. Good size and might have that great ceiling, but unless he lands in that perfect spot and where he gets coached up and does really well and really hits it, sure he could, but too many variables for me to really draft Quentin Johnston or really take him really high.
Yeah. So. I was thinking like if I had to pick him, where would I pick him? It's like all 4 quarterbacks would have to be taken. I haven't really looked much into Jalen Hyatt, so I'm gonna have to look more into him. But the 2 running backs have to be taken. Michael Mayer would have to be taken. So it's like if I had like the 112, I guess I would take him. Right. But like I also would try and avoid him and hope like I can get one of these guys I really like fall to me in that situation. So I'm also a little bit down on him as well. So I thought the big game, the national championship, he didn't play very well at all. Couldn't get any separation, and he really wasn't getting double teamed that much. So
I have a little bit of a TCU PTSD from Jalen Reagor too, so I'm trying to avoid any of the TCU guys.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, well that's our time. Thank you guys for joining in, Frederick and whoever was on Facebook commenting, and Craig for his early comment. We thank you guys. We will see you next week. I think next week we are talking about free agency. It'll depend, but we might be talking about some of these free agency moves. If not, I think we're going to go talk about like quarterbacks, our top 10, either quarterbacks or tight ends. So we're going to see what happens with free agency first, if there's enough to talk about. If not, we'll go into our top 10 dynasty tight ends next week. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you next week.
Thank you guys.
See ya.